Thank you very much for the kind remarks, Ambassador Campbell and Professor Michael Brenner, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to get started right away because I know you have questions probably in the audience, and I have some questions myself we want to hear from our distinguished panelists. So I'm going to begin with a question about Rabin. Is the kind of political courage that was displayed by Yitzhak Rabin possible in today's polarized Israel? And what remains of Rabin's legacy? And Aaron, I know you knew him personally, so maybe you can start.
Sure. First of all, it's great to be here back at AU. I taught a course here in 1977 at SIS. My wife, Lindsay, was the Hillel director here for several years. It's great to be here with Michael, Guy, with you, and particularly with Chuck, who is one of the finest analysts of Israeli national security policy and foreign policy. Tough question to answer. I'll quote Marx, not Groucho, the other one, who, and again, forgive me, writing in the late 19th century, Marx wrote that men make history, but rarely as they please. And the reality is it's the interaction between human agency and circumstance, in my judgment, that determines why things happen. Both in terms of a country's domestic policy and its foreign policy. I mean, Rabin was a unique individual, a man who was a counterintuitive politician. He didn't suffer fool small talk easily, but he was extraordinarily authentic, not a great public speaker, the first native-born, I think that's right, Chuck, Israeli prime minister. I had the privilege of knowing Rabin. Both my parents were close to Yitzhak and Leah. And I remember my first encounter with Rabin was in April 1974. I had been in Israel during the Yom Kippur War, October War. And I had a Seder with Rabin. And Rabin asked me for my views on Anwar Sadat. This was after the first disengagement agreement with Israel and Egypt. And I went on and on and on, and Rabin looked at me and waved with a dismissive wave of the hand that I would come to know so well over the years, said, you know nothing about Egypt and the Middle East. I didn't have much to say for the remainder of the Seder. So Rabin emerged at an extraordinary moment. And I think that the history of peacemaking in Israel is not the history of the left. It is not the history even of the center left. It's the history of hard men who, as a consequence of reevaluation of their own sensibilities, their own views, change. And Rabin, the breaker of bones during the first Intifada, became an extraordinary agent. The Israeli-Palestinian issue was not his preference. He would have much preferred, in that fateful summer of 1993, a deal with the Syrians. The offer that Christopher made to Assad, which was Rabin's, the so-called deposit, was full withdrawal from Golan. That was the offer. Full withdrawal from Golan as long as Israeli needs are met. Assad was suspicious, worrisome, said no to Christopher, and then the ball was shifted to Shimon Peres, and the rest is history. So an extraordinary leader, authentic, reevaluated his own views. Life cut far too short. And at some point we should talk about the counterfactual, what would have happened had Rabin lived.
So first of all, I also want to thank AU for the invitation, Professor Brenner, Ambassador Campbell. It's great to be here, other than the occasion itself. 30 years, I remember vividly exactly where I was when the first bulletins came that Rabin had been assassinated. I was watching a rerun of Crocodile Dundee, for those who've seen it. It's a great movie, and then the news bulletin. Now, I had met Rabin a few times. I did not know him nearly as well as Aaron did, and Aaron is for me, one of the great champions of the peace process. Not all of it succeeded, but some of it did, and in any event, it was a monumental effort for which I think many of us are still grateful. in Israel, and hopefully things will turn around. Okay, the first time I met Rabin, what Aaron was saying reminded me of this. I was a graduate student. I asked to interview him. This is late 70s. He was the leader of the opposition at the time, between his terms as premier. And I walk in and I introduce myself. I say, hi, I'm him. And his response, so he's sitting behind his desk. His response is, yeah, I know. Now, I was kind of taken aback, because the normal response would be nice to meet you, or yeah, Yitzhak or something. But this was Rabin. Of course he knew who I was. I was on his agenda for the day, and why waste time? And then seeing him, I mean, this was a really remarkable man. He was a beloved leader in Israel. Even people who disagreed with him strongly respected him and liked him as a person. Unlike certain leaders who will remain unnamed today, he was a man of truly incredible integrity, and he was a man who put the nation first. And I'm not sure that that's the case of all of our leaders today. He was a hero of the War of Independence, the hero of the Six-Day War, of the victory at the time. He was the chief of staff, the prime minister who launched the Entebbe operation. There were songs about Rabin. If he was a beloved leader nationally, I must say, I loved the man. He was sort of a national father figure. And he was incredibly courageous. The Oslo breakthrough, I mean, it's hard to understand today, but this was, I don't even know what to call it. This was an earthquake in Israel and in the world. But the fact that he would do that, when he's on the White House lawn on the ceremony, the signing ceremony, and Aaron saw this, I'm sure, up close, and I saw it on TV, you saw a man there who, I mean, the man Yitzhak Rabin wanted to be anywhere in the world except on a stage with Yasser Arafat, who I think he detested. And he'd spent half his life trying to kill the guy. Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister, had made a strategic decision. And with a little encouragement from Clinton, finally overcomes his sense of revulsion and agrees to shake the man's hand. But I also remember a vignette. I mean, he's at some Hollywood gala, and the guest star speaker, whoever it was, comes up to him with the mic and to give him a chance to sing one sentence along with her. She was doing something which was supposed to be good for him. Politicians normally like this kind of exposure. Rabin, chief of staff of prime minister, was one of the shyest people around, and he just starts getting red in the face and manages to mutter a couple of words. And then I saw that same thing on various occasions over the years. And I says, how do you be a chief of staff and a prime minister, and you're a painfully shy person, but also a militarily and a politically heroic person?
Well, you brought up the Oslo process, and I think a lot of people in this room are also following very closely the current ceasefire negotiations. So what are some lessons that we could learn from the unraveling of the Oslo peace process towards applying it to today's ceasefire talks? What are some lessons? What are some challenges? How can we connect the dots here?
First of all, I think it's important to stress, because there's a misunderstanding that has taken hold over the years. The Oslo framework never talked about or never had an end game of a Palestinian state. It was a negotiating framework for a 5-year period, which was to lead to some outcome of which a Palestinian state might be one of them, but not necessarily. Rabin was deeply skeptical of the Palestinians, of the PLO, of their ability to make peace with Israel. And I remember at the time, one of the things that I thought that he did incorrectly was whenever he spoke to the public, it was, there is a chance for peace. There is a chance for peace. He never said, there's going to be peace, there's going to be a breakthrough, it's going to be a brave new world. He didn't talk like Peres did. Maybe Peres oversold, but he undersold. And I always thought that if you're trying to take the population with you in an incredibly controversial issue, maybe you can oversell it a little bit and at least put it in more confident terms. I think, and I'll say something controversial here, I think that the classic two-state solution is dead. We have outsettled ourselves. The Palestinians have outrejected themselves and too much bloodshed. I think we have to look at new ways of achieving peace and of separating. And if we have time, I'm happy to talk about it. But I think that's the casualty of the 2-year war now. The final nail in the coffin of the Oslo process was now. And that's a very tough thing to say because the two-state solution has become an international mantra. Everybody talks about the two-state solution. They really don't know what they're talking about. Everybody says two-state solution.
Aaron, do you agree that the two-state solution is dead?
I mean, here's what I would say. I'll relate a personal experience and then just an observation. I was at the last, actually the only effort that brought in a American president who cared about this issue, Bill Clinton, together with a PLO leader who had a monopoly on the forces of violence within Palestinian society. He chose at times to deploy that violence and at other times to restrain it, Yasser Arafat, and a very risk-ready Ehud Barak to Camp David for 2 weeks. That's been the only effort of an actual attempt by 3 leaders over a 2-week period to resolve the 5 basic issues that need to be resolved if, in fact, we can even begin to talk about a two-state solution. Jerusalem, border security, refugees, an end of all conflict and claims. And I would say to you, at the end of that summit, the gaps on those 5 core issues were as wide and as deep as the Grand Canyon. Today, I would use I would have to identify a term out of astronomy. Maybe galactic is the term to use with respect to resolving those 5 core issues. When people talk about 2 states, at least the way they did in the 90s, those were the parameters. Now, Chuck has made an observation, and I think it's borne out by the grim and sober reality that we all face. At the same time, I would only offer this. I'm 76 years old. I cannot see what is in front of me, for good or for ill. I occupy a very tiny place on the planet for a very short period of time. I do not have the right to mortgage my own children's future or my grandchildren's future, let alone the future of Israelis and Palestinians, by saying never. I hear never repeatedly when it comes to any solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I think this is unwise. It frankly is illogical. We are here talking about the memory of a man dead now for 30 years. But the key takeaway here is leadership. And I frame this as a question because I don't know the answer. If you had leaders who were masters of their politics, not prisoners of their ideologies, if you had leaders who were willing to consider not only their own narrative, but the narrative of others, if you had leaders that had a moral and ethical grounding and were able to turn the M in me upside down so it becomes a W in we, and again, I will say to you, I voted for Republicans and Democrats and worked for Republicans and Democrats. We have a president who is constitutionally, in both senses of the word, unable to turn the M in me upside down. Rabin thought about others, and Rabin evolved over the years. So I pose the question. I mean, there is every reason to agree 100% with what Chuck has said, that the two-state solution as we defined it is dead. I mean, I accept that as a premise, but I would also say to you that not even the famed oracle at Delphi, Pythia, reading the best of goat entrails, can make a fundamental prediction on what might or could evolve in the years to come. And I keep that piece of humility because I think Rabin would have agreed to it as well. Chuck said he didn't oversell. He wouldn't oversell. Amos Oz called him the cautious engineer. It was Rabin who said there are no sacred dates when it came to fulfilling Israeli and or Palestinian commitments under the Oslo process. So I guess I would conclude by quoting Jack Kennedy. And I borrowed this from him. He described himself as an idealist without illusion. That's where I am. And that's where I am on this issue about the possibilities of a conflict-ending agreement between Israelis and Palestinians.
So I want to follow up with you on the role of leaders and leadership, but focus on our president, who you mentioned. You've worked for multiple administrations, and you've seen different presidents in action. In what ways are Trump's kind of transactional policies or approach different? What can you tell us more about?
I would just, I want to surrender the mic to Chuck and to you. I would only say what I've written and said publicly repeatedly now since October 9th, since the Qataris, the Turks, the Egyptians, and the Americans signed a piece of paper which committed Israel and Hamas to phase one. That is all that they have signed. You should take a look at the document. It's only one page because it goes into, at some length, to what Hamas's obligations are to return dead hostages. There are so many holes in that proposition. But I would only say this about Trump, that no president I ever worked for, and I would toss in Obama and Biden, ever talked to an Israeli prime minister and compelled an Israeli prime minister to sign on to an American quote-unquote peace initiative, which it is not. Nonetheless, it's an extraordinary demonstration of presidential resolve and presidential will. And the reason he could do it and Joe Biden could not is because Donald Trump has freed himself from the two sets of constraints that have prevented American presidents from imposing costs or consequences on Israel. Number one, there is absolutely no emotional identification. This is not Bill Clinton, who I watched up close and personal grieve in the wake of Rabin's murder, weep at Rabin's funeral, write in his memoirs, I loved Rabin as I had loved no man. Bill Clinton was in love with the idea, the security, and the people of Israel. This is not Joe Biden, who on October 10th gave this extraordinary speech 3 days after October 7th and referred to the, quote, black hole of loss. And you could see it in the president's eyes. He conflated the willful and indiscriminate murder by Hamas, the sexual predation, the mutilation, the taking of hostages, the willful, what would then soon be the willful execution of hostages, with his own deep sense of tragedy in his own life. Joe Biden was in love, as Clinton was, with the idea, with people's security of Israel. This is not Donald Trump. That's number one. And number two, more important, there are no political constraints. None. Donald Trump owns the Republican Party. There is no higher court of appeals for an Israeli prime minister, as Prime Minister Netanyahu did in 2015, when John Boehner invited him to address Congress, to undermine Obama's Iran nuclear agreement. Good, bad, or indifferent doesn't matter with respect to the agreement. The Republican Party was a higher court of appeals. Trump is freed from it. Yes, there are MAGA outliers and influencers who don't like Israel. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, Rand Paul, who's basically, I think, libertarian against a lot of things. And the Democrats are tougher on Israel now. And I'm not talking about the progressives. Leave out the AOCs. Let's talk about the three Chris's, Van Hollen, Murphy, and Coons, who all have called for conditioning or restricting U.S. military assistance to Israel. Donald Trump has more freedom to pressure Israel than any president, with possible exception of Dwight Eisenhower, who threatened David Ben-Gurion with political and economic sanctions if he didn't withdraw Israeli forces from Sinai in 1956. And that is remarkable. Whatever I think of Donald Trump, it is a remarkable demonstration. Now, whether it will follow through, what it actually means over time, but it's something to notice.
And yet, despite or maybe because of that pressure, Chuck, Israel seems to be enamored with President Trump. Can you tell us a little bit about how Israelis perceive Trump in comparison to his predecessors? I half-jokingly told people he would win an election in Israel if he were to run there.
So first of all, I just have to say I agree with Aaron's comment about never say never. And I was a lifelong supporter of the two-state solution, but there's the old definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and expecting a different outcome. And so I'm looking at different ways. If somebody can come up, excuse me, with a viable way of going forward for two states, I'm all for it. And I think Aaron described the difference in presidential approaches perfectly. In Israel, look, I mean, all politics, we know the old saying, all politics are local. And every state views its relationship with the United States in terms of its own interests. And Israelis, because we face so many different challenges, it's particularly important. And the dependence on the US is so extreme. So the slightest hint of a change in American policy and what a president or other senior leader says immediately sets off aftershocks in Israel. Now here you have a president in his first term who finally implemented congressional legislation which called for the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. It only took 25 years for that to happen. I'm not sure, by the way, that it was the right decision at that time. I always thought it was a great, which I call it an inducement, a prize for Israel that should be offered in the context of a major concession, but it wasn't going to happen, so it's good he did it. And he recognizes the Golan as part of Israel, and that is a good thing because it is and is going to remain a part of Israel. And anyone who thinks, I think, otherwise, and yes, never say never, but I don't think that's on the table. And the Abraham Accords, which was a dramatic breakthrough, and of course it was the basis, had the war not derailed it or postponed it at least, for the expansion of relations with the Saudis. And once it was with the Saudis, other Gulf states and other Muslim states would have followed in their footsteps. That, in effect, would have been the end of the Arab state-Israeli conflict. It would have left just the Palestinians, and the non-state actors, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. But the Arab-Israeli conflict would have come to an end, and Israel would have been integrated or relatively accepted in the region. That didn't happen. Well, the second term starts off with the first few months are iffy, actually, in terms of what he's doing. He's putting some pressure on Israel. But then we fight the first joint American-Israeli war in June. Trump, because he provides himself with the kind of freedom of movement that Aaron was discussing, I don't think he had fully committed to joining the war until he saw that it was a success. But there was deep pre-war planning, and once he saw that Israel was succeeding, he did join. And so, on the one hand, we are at the absolute height of American-Israeli strategic relations, the first joint offensive op. Last year, the first joint defensive operations during the 2 Iranian missile attacks. To a certain extent, if you look at it, things have never been better. On the other hand, I think things have never been worse. And Israel's position in the US has collapsed on the democratic side. It's absolutely frightening how bad the collapse is. And it already preceded the war, but the war amplified it. And on the Republican side as well, things are still good, but there are cracks there. And if you ask me what's the one issue that keeps me up at night, it's not the Iranians. One way or the other, we'll work things out with them. And it's not the Palestinians because, again, somehow it'll be worked out. Somehow God will be good. And Ben-Gurion famously said that in Israel, if you don't believe in miracles, you're not a realist. So I believe in miracles. The one thing that keeps me up at night is the relationship with the United States, because that really is existential. Because Israel needs the U.S. for everything, whether it's for the peace process, whether it's for handling Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, every threat, every issue we face, normalization, everything is via Washington. And that's the one issue that really bothers me.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll turn it into the audience. But the ceasefire, what would it take for this ceasefire to become permanent? What are the kind of, as you see it, the key obstacles, and are the ingredients there for a successful permanent deal?
You have to answer three questions. Number one, who or what will govern Gaza? Number two, who or what will provide security in all of its very complex manifestations and aspects? And number three, who or what can and will ensure a regular and predictable delivery, not just of humanitarian assistance, access to potable water, sanitation, food, shelter, medical care, for a long-suffering Palestinian population, but also begin to talk about reconstruction or reconstitution of Gaza. Those are the three questions that need to be answered. And I think each of them contains a universe of complexity and detail. I don't know whether or not the moment that Donald Trump has created will endure. But I think if you looked at phase one and ask yourself the question, why did people care about Gaza at all? Three reasons. And phase one begins to address all of them. Number one, the hostages. Libyan hostages are now returned. The Trump administration clearly is not willing to make the return of the 13, 12 Israeli nationals and one foreign national, a deal breaker. But more or less, not in terms of Israeli politics, the urgency of the hostage issue has been lessened. If that is the case, then the war as we have known it over the last 2 years, comprehensive, massive deployment of Israeli divisions, artillery and airstrikes, although yesterday's strikes, which were widespread, resulted in, I think, the deaths of 100. And then finally, if in fact the kinetic environment changes, then humanitarian assistance will be possible. So you could argue that the urgency that the international community, the region, the U.S. approached the Gaza issue on October 7, a lot of that urgency is being sucked out of the process, assuming the first phase of this holds. But ending the war, not possible on terms that normal humans, let's assume the three of us, as normal humans, would describe an end to the war in Gaza unless you address those three basic questions.
Do you agree?
Absolutely. But I'd also say, your question presumes, the assumption behind it is that we want a ceasefire. And a ceasefire is a means to an end. It's not an objective in its own right. Now, believe me, I'm happy to see the fighting over on a personal level. But one of the fundamental objectives of the war was to topple Hamas as the governing body in Gaza. The other one, other than returning the hostages, was defeating them militarily. They've been defeated militarily. Not destroyed, they've been defeated. But if the war really ends, as it looks now, with Hamas in control of Gaza, and all the talk about the international force and the international governing body, if it happens at all, it'll happen, but they're not going to disarm Hamas. And that's absolutely clear, I think. If Hamas remains in power, they've won the war. Because their objective wasn't just to survive. The objective was actually Israel's annihilation. one of the amazing things that we found out after the war broke out from documents that were found is that there was a much broader plan together with the Iranians and with Hezbollah. This was supposed to be a war of Israel's annihilation. The Iranians, we always knew they have a long-term objective, a strategy for Israel's destruction, and there's famously the clock in Palestine Square in Tehran, with the countdown, because it was supposed to be from 2049. So we knew there was the long-term strategy. But it turns out that they were actually coordinating a war that was to bring about Israel's imminent destruction. And Sinwar didn't coordinate the exact timing with them. But he thought, once I've started it, and if I achieve some of my initial military objectives, and I think he achieved even more, then that will draw them in, they'll join. Fortunately, that didn't happen. But I don't think we can allow Hamas to remain the governing body in Gaza. Now, when I say can't allow, does that mean restarting the fighting? I hope not. I won't be surprised if that happens. And here there will have to be very, very close coordination with the US, with the Trump administration. And yes, Trump, he's created a situation in which he can really dictate the terms. But so far, it was dictating the terms for just the first phase, which is the easy part of it. This was actually I'll just say a totally subjective opinion. This was great that they separated phase 1 from phase 2 because we got the live hostages home. But there was a big price to be paid for that, not just the fact that a few thousand terrorists, people with blood on their hands were released, but the fact that we're leaving Hamas in power. Maybe we're going to have to find some diplomatic way, and I don't think it's going to succeed, in replacing them. Now, if my assumption that that's not going to succeed is true, then I also think Israel's going to end up occupying a good portion of Gaza for a very long time. And I think that's a horrendous outcome for us. There's a reason that Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. It was a unilateral withdrawal. It was very controversial in Israel. But who wants to go back, except for a few kooks on the far right, who wants to occupy Gaza? 2 million people who hate our guts, who we have nothing in common with, and I think we just have to find a way to separate securely from them. The same on the West Bank. But Gaza is now for the first time, the primary focus of the conflict.
Okay, and on the question of the future of Hamas in Gaza, I would just add that the roles of Qatar and Turkey are going to be very, very critical here. I want to open it up to questions from the audience. I think Davida, I want to also introduce our new colleague, Davida here, who's back there with a mic. Are you going to go around and... There's one here and my own. 2 microphones. So anyone have any questions? And we usually give students first chance here. If you can introduce yourself and...
Yes, I'm Eitan. Thank you guys for coming. I'm a SIS student here. After the attacks yesterday, Trump was quoted as saying that as long as the attacks resulted in the death of Israeli soldiers, that Israel has the right to attack back. How does that directly contradict previous statements by other presidents or other high-up officials that you've been involved with? Maybe Mr. Miller could answer that question possibly.
I think there's just a reality here. Hamas has been hollowed out as a military organization, but it exists as an insurgency. And we don't, the 2 incidents, Chuck may have a view on this. I don't know what you had Hamas fighters emerging out of a tunnel in Rafah twice now. The first time killing 2 Israeli soldiers and wounding 3, and I think the second attack on Sunday against an engineering unit killed 1 Israeli. The Israelis are going to continue to insist on the right to preempt and prevent. And it's hard to see any American administration in the face of that, basically saying, no, you have no right to do that. And I think that's, it's the notion if you're riding a bike, when you stop pedaling, it's clear what happens. And that's the problem with phase one, moving on to phase two. If it doesn't evolve, then you are going to see a lot of cracks in the ceasefire. There's a monitoring committee, but the reality is you have two combatants who are pledged to one another's mutual destruction. There's no confidence and trust between them, and there are no direct negotiations. And that is a recipe, seems to me, for continued violations. And each side thinking the absolute worst about the motivations of the other.
Okay, we'll take the next question then.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm a student in the School of International Service. First, I want to say thank you for being here. And my question is, it seems that under the circumstances of this ceasefire and the war ending, it's primarily due to the quote-unquote friendship between Trump and Netanyahu. When Trump leaves office, I hope, in 2028, do you see this American-led peace movement continuing, or do you think that's going to die out with a leader that isn't as close with Netanyahu?
And your question is directed to
Either one.
Yeah.
Look, the U.S. has been involved in the peace process since the late 60s, certainly the early 70s. Every administration has been involved to a significant extent and some very significant, and Aaron was part of those administrations. I don't think what's happening now is Trump and Netanyahu. Yes, Trump imposed this on Netanyahu, but it's an American interest, and any American president would have tried in one way or the other to bring an end to this. Biden tried. I don't know what's going to happen with the next president because there's a generational change underway. Trump is probably the last of the American presidents who grew up, who came to political awareness in the decades of Israeli heroism, of Holocaust awareness, of the height of the shared norms between the two countries. And now we have more and more leaders who've grown up in the post-67 era, and Israel is viewed differently in the US. And in the last 20 years, a different narrative has taken hold. Until then, the Palestinians were the obstacle to peace. Now, I think the last 2 decades, Israel is viewed as the obstacle to peace. So who's the next president going to be? Is it going to be a progressive or a moderate Democrat? And it's not even necessarily moderate, just any Democrat. Is it going to be a Republican who's gung-ho Israel? Is it going to be a Republican from the right wing and more isolationist, not necessarily anti-Israel, just more isolationist? So I still think any administration will make at least some effort to go forward. But there's also, we've tried and tried and tried. Maybe it's a losing case, and we want to focus on the Far East in any event. Why invest all these efforts if it's unlikely to succeed?
Let me just add something to what Chuck said earlier. If you asked me what a U.S. ally was, we do not have formal treaty obligations with Israel. It's not an alliance that we have with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines. There's no treaty. 3 foundations, in my judgment, constitute a U.S. ally. Number one, a high coincidence of interests, not a strict coincidence, because no 2 countries have a strict coincidence. That's one. A high coincidence of values, value affinity. The perception of elites and the public is that said ally shares the values that America holds. That's the second foundation. And the third is a very strong and sustainable basis of domestic support. I share Chuck's concern. I think all 3 of these foundational elements are under tremendous stress. It's not time. Someone who believes deeply in the importance of a special relationship with Israel, but not an exclusive relationship, it's not time yet for what I call the cosmic oive. But if you care about the U.S.-Israeli relationship and you want to see it continue as a special relationship, then you need to be concerned about these three basic elements because they are all under significant pressure. And the one adhesive that has been critically important, the glue that holds all of this together, is bipartisanship. And right now, I could identify at least three pronounced strains in Washington among elites of the U.S.-Israeli relationship. And that's not healthy. That's not good. And that's extremely concerning to me.
Zach, our former student, has a question here. We appreciate alumni joining us for these events.
Yeah, perfect. My question is for both of our panelists. Kind of taking a step and going more into regional affairs with this coalition of regional partners led by Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, along with the Turks and the Egyptians, increasingly aligned on negotiation efforts. Do you think this axis can redefine the landscape and challenge traditional U.S. leadership in regional negotiations?
It's an interesting question. I think one of the successes of this policy has been the fact that the current president of all the regions of the Middle East, the Gulf, for this president is the thing. It's the thing because it reflects his one signal achievement in the Middle East, the Abraham Accords. It's the thing because he prides himself in an ability to establish relationships with authoritarians that have few democratic constraints. It's the thing because he is easily flattered and feted and catered to. And it's the thing, let's be very clear, because of the financial and business interests of the Trump organization. And the amount I'll offer you can take it as a partisan comment if you want. I worked and voted for Republicans and Democrats. The degree of self-dealing is extraordinary to me in a society in which the national interest is now fundamentally conflated with the interests of the Trump's business organizations. It's really quite distressing. To quote Peter Baker of the New York Times, it's the death and dearth of outrage. And I don't really understand it. It's another subject for another whole discussion. But the Gulf is the thing. And the Gulf leaders are they're afraid of Trump, or they're indebted to him, or they want something from him. Whether it's the Qatari 747 Plus that's being refitted and will be up in the skies, I guarantee you, before the end of Trump's second term, or the new base within a base to train Qatari pilots. It's an extraordinary relation, but it has worked. It has been functional on this discrete particular issue because two of Hamas's key supporters, three, the Iranians are not as nearly central as they have been. The Qataris and the Turks and the Egyptians, since geography is destiny, those three have managed to persuade Hamas of something that I wasn't sure they could ever be persuaded of. But now that they understand that freeing the hostages was not a liability, it was an asset, because it has now enabled Hamas to operate free from the relentless day-to-day military pressures of the Israelis under some constraint, and to reestablish their influence and control in the 47% of Gaza that the Israelis do not control. And that is leaning on Hamas, delivering that, was a consequence of Trump's relationships. As harmful as they may be to the American national interest, it really worked here. So yeah, I think whether it's a redefining the landscape proposition, I don't know, but it's worked.
Maybe I'll just add, I mean, the axis that you're talking about is Qatar, Turkey, Hamas/Muslim Brotherhood. It's not Egypt. Egypt was part of these negotiations, but Egypt actually, I think, looks at this rising axis with considerable concern. I think there's a great deal of concern about this in Israel and in the region as a whole, for different reasons. The Arabs, because they've got the history of the Ottoman Empire behind them, long-term memory. We don't really want Turkey to become the regional leader once again. Been there, done that. And in Israel, there's, of course, the concern that, well, Turkey has become a very hostile state in the last 2 decades under Erdogan, almost an enemy state. And there's a danger, I mean, there's a fear that there could even be a military clash with them, primarily in Syria. Now, a clash with a NATO ally, interesting. That's never happened before for Israel, and one which the current administration happens to be particularly close to, and one which is led by a leader who I think is rabidly anti-Israel, maybe anti-Semitic, uses Israel as a whipping horse for domestic politics. That's what to criticize, and I've been known to do it once or twice. But yeah, calling Shimon Peres a Nazi and calling Israel a Nazi state is so I'm very concerned about the rise of Turkey and the combination with Qatar, because I don't understand to this day what Qatar really is. Is it the responsible negotiating partner that we may have seen in the last year or two? Is it the country that Israel asked to fund Hamas, but is it really a pro-Hamas organization, state? Is it a state which is funding all sorts of radical things, and which, by the way, is funding a lot in the United States, and maybe shaping or contributing to shaping American opinion in ways that we don't want to see.
So it is 1 o'clock, but I still think we could take maybe one more question just to wrap things up. Please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have not heard anything about what Netanyahu called his greatest fear, which is Iran. I realize they've been greatly weakened, but not destroyed. And what do you envision the role of Iran, especially their relations with China and Russia in the Middle East?
So it's true that, it's absolutely true that they weren't defeated or destroyed. They were hit pretty hard. And I think the American media and parts of the Democratic spectrum weren't willing to recognize Trump's success here. We bought a significant period of time. I don't know exactly how much it is, and I don't know exactly what the word significant means, but a couple of few years in terms of the amount of the delay, the postponement in the nuclear program. The history of this program is that for 30 years, that we've been dealing with it for 30 years, a little more. And there's never been a knockout blow. We've hit them in a variety of ways over the years. There was the famous Stuxnet virus, a cyber attack. There have been repeated kinetic attacks. We've bought time. Each time we bought a little bit of time and postponed the program. This is one of the more successful postponements. It's something that actually for years people have speculated about, an Israeli attack, maybe an Israeli-American attack, and here that happened. I think down the line, one of the problems, of course, is that there isn't a coherent American strategy here. There also isn't a coherent Israeli strategy. But the Trump administration is, let's say, less consistent, more erratic in its behavior. What's the U.S. going to do? Well, we need strong sanctions. We need the economic and the diplomatic pressure. We need the threat, at least, of further military action. And I hope we can reach a diplomatic solution, because that's the only one which potentially provides for a long-term solution. Iran may not agree to totally dismantle the program, but if we could get a new DCOP, a new agreement that gives us 20 or 30 years this time, as we say in Passover, dayenu, it's enough.
I just add one additional analytical point. Outside of the Gulf, there are at least 5 Arab states that are in active phases of some sort of dysfunction: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Yemen. In my judgment, as I watch this region, outside of the Gulf, Saudi and the Emirates, it's the 3 non-Arabs in this region that, in my judgment, are the states to watch. They are the keepers. They're not going anywhere. They are highly functional. They can project their power beyond their borders in ways that no other regional party can. Turkey, Israel, and Iran. The notion that somehow the state of Israel is going to somehow evaporate or disappear, a la some crusader narrative, makes no sense. Iran and Turkey also are highly functional states with strong potential, strong economies, and I mean, in the Iranian case, if freed from the malocracy, extraordinary potential. So, for good or ill, watch these 3 because they are central to what happens in this region.
I think that would be a good note to end it on. Thank you very much to both of our panelists. I know you're both very busy. We all appreciate your time. So thank you.
Thanks for the great moderating, Guy.
Appreciate it. And thank you all for coming. Okay, well, it's fun to see you. Yeah.
Chuck, I'll circle back. Well, I'll find it. You're in Northwest. Yeah. So, I'm there. All right, for sure. Hey.
Good to see you. I'm teaching here for he's a colleague.
Extreme. But here's the question. I remember seeing in the front page of the leading newspaper written by a security official who interviewed the prosecutors who interrogated him. Number one, Amir, right, admitted the rabbi asked him to do it. He wouldn't have done it without the rabbi. Number two, the rabbi was never prosecuted. He was never indicted. And when this reporter asked those 2 prosecutors why, you want to guess what the answer was? We would have been next. Now, what does that tell you about extreme religious nationalism?